I had the pleasure a number of years ago of meeting Nancy, and then and more recently I had the pleasure of going to a talk she gave about roads in and out of Lynchburg. And I said, well, that was just fabulous. And I kind of found out she was going to give the talk, and I kind of said, Nancy, would you invite me to that? I kind of invited myself. And so anyway, I had a great time and enjoyed what she had to say. I thought it was very interesting and appropriate. I thought we were looking for, programs out here, and I asked Nancy to come here and give a talk and extend her talk out into the Nelson a little bit away from Lynchburg. Anyway, Nancy is an historian that lives in Lynchburg. She writes and edits stuff extensively, and I don't know if anybody knows much more history about the Amherst-Lynchburg region than Nancy does. So Nancy Marion, she was Blackwell from Amherst, and she married Dave Marion, and so here's Nancy Marion.
Thank you. First, I got to say that I'm very intimidated to be talking to you all about Nelson County roads, since I'm sure most of you probably know more about them than I do.
Just make up stuff, that's what we do.
Well, especially Mike Craigle's in the room, and if he doesn't know more about them. But, as Dick said, I first wrote this talk for a club in Lynchburg, so it was centered on Lynchburg originally, but I've deleted a lot of the Lynchburg to Lexington and Lynchburg roads and tried to put in more of them around here. So to back up a little, when I finished college and started working in Lynchburg, I was still living at home with my mother in Amherst County, and I wasn't terribly eager to be going home after work, so I would kill time exploring the city. And I just tried to find every road that left Lynchburg. Because I didn't know Lynchburg very well. I grew up in Amherst, and the only time we went was, school shopping or to the hospital or something like that. So I didn't really know the roads and streets there. So I wanted to find every road that left the city. And that interest never died. So I thought I'd show you some of the maps of these roads, but then my research led me all the way back to the Indians, and I've just become fascinated with the changing face of the area and the maps that document it. So next one. So
Can you tell us where that one?
I don't know exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's in Nelson County. That's a picture taken by Victor Wood, and his son Langley Wood gave me all of Victor's pictures, and they had relatives up here in Nelson County and would come frequently. That's either on the cover of Paul Saunders' book or it's in the book.
It's on the cover.
Yeah, I think it's the one on the cover. I've got another one by the same photographer that's kind of similar. You'll see. So the earliest Virginians, and let's just start with the Native Americans and the bison, made their own roads, or they used the many waterways, in the case of humans, for transportation. It was far easier on the water. This map is the same as that Robert Rhodes map over there. I don't know I don't know the origin of it, because this map was never folded up and put in the book, the one I'm showing you right now. So
It tells you in Rose's book.
yeah, that it was done for the book?
Yes.
Okay.
By a direct descendant of Robert Rhodes.
Oh, okay, cool. So here, for instance, is the James River, just to orient you a little bit on that map. But most of the rest of the small lines here are rivers and streams, because there just weren't that many roads. So I added a couple of cities, you can orient yourself there: Stanton, Charlottesville, Lynchburg, and Richmond. And then 3 of these trails became the genesis of 3 of our interstates. So that great Indian Warpath, later the Great Wagon Road, stretched from Alabama through the Shenandoah Valley into New York, essentially what became Interstate 81. And off to the east, up in the top right, the Potomac Path was the forerunner of what is now generally Interstate 95. and followed the fall line from Fairfax to Petersburg. Three-notched road or three-chop road led west from Richmond toward the mountains, and it's roughly the route of Interstate 64. Then there was the lower road, the trading path, which was the precursor of our 29. And then another trading road below Lynchburg connected to the Appomattox River, probably near Farmville, where the river was navigable. And this is roughly Route 460 today. So once the Europeans arrived and began settling and growing tobacco for export, they needed better ways to get heavy loads to the ports. Here's a team, it looks like an ox and a mule, hauling a hogshead of tobacco in Richmond. But they look the same everywhere. So. And this, skipping ahead a couple hundred years, is a team of horses pulling apples in Nelson County. So we're still using similar mode of transportation there. But back to the 1700s, the rivers were still the best way to get heavy loads to the market. And here is a bateau used to haul 8 hogsheads downrivers, and probably tobacco there. By the mid-1700s, there were 2 major trading markets available from the Valley of Virginia. One was Philadelphia via the Great Wagon Road, and the other was the much closer Virginia ports that lay over the mountains, but with no ready access. There were few roads, and they were impassable much of the time. It wasn't until after the American Revolution that serious efforts began to capture the trade from the Shenandoah Valley and to prevent its loss to Philadelphia or even south to the Spanish port of New Orleans. In 1785, the General Road Law in Virginia was revised and listed requirements for width and smoothness. Generally, that meant to be cleared of vegetation. And that was somewhat better than an Ohio law that demanded that stumps left in the road should be no more than a foot high. Wow. I wouldn't want to hit one of those. In 1816, the General Assembly created a Board of Public Works to administer new transportation funds. The major transportation funds expended by the state were used for canals and for roads to connect the canals. They appointed Leone Baldwin Jr. to be the first transportation engineer. Baldwin advocated paving roads using the methods that the Scottish engineers McAdam and Telford had pioneered. Here's a diagram showing the Telford and McAdam paving methods. Baldwin specified a roadbed 30 feet wide into which are placed large stones, well beaten, close to each other over the whole width. Upon this is another bed of stones broken to the size of about 4 inches, well hammered and rammed in. The third and last layer should be coarse gravel or stone broken to the size of hickory nuts, thrown on evenly or rammed or rolled with a heavy iron roller. So that is kind of what we have these days. If you've ever wondered where the word tarmac comes from, it's from McAdam. The McAdam method is the Mac, and with some tar as a binder, so it's tarmac. That's where you get that. Paving was not generally done unless the paving, meaning the McAdam method, wasn't usually done unless the road was a turnpike. And here you see an actual turnpike, that bar across the road that blocked the entrance until the toll was paid. This may or may not be a scene on the Howardsville Turnpike. It accompanied an article on the Howardsville Turnpike in the Crozet Gazette by Lynn Coffey, but she didn't say exactly where the picture was. You probably all know the big survey that eventually became the Wintergreen Resort. What you may not know is that a century earlier, the busy, historic Howardsville Turnpike had traversed it. And this text is largely from what Mary Buford Hitz wrote in For Love of the Land. In the first half of the 19th century, the livelihood of those living in the more remote western regions of the state depended on their ability to get their goods, farm and mineral products, and livestock to eastern markets. For them, the fastest way to Richmond was the James River, which meant crossing the Blue Ridge to get to Howardsville on the James. The first section of the turnpike was authorized by the legislature in 1847, and when completed, it was carrying a daily load of wagons filled with flour, whiskey, corn, and other grains and vegetables. And there were oxen and mules carrying crates of chickens balanced on either side, as well as livestock being driven along on their own steam. By 1850, both the Howardsville and the Rockfish Gap turnpikes had a superintendent and crew that saw to the very challenging maintenance of these roads, used all year and subject to blockage by heavy snowfall and washouts. However, the heyday of the turnpikes over the mountains didn't last long. By the end of the 1850s, the trains were using the Crozet Tunnel, going under the Blue Ridge Mountains instead of over them. I'm sure most of you know more about this than I do, but I found this map showing the old Howardsville Turnpike on a site called Wilderlist. At the right, you can see Route 6, 151, with Pounding Branch Road, Route 709 going off to the west. So if you don't know how to get there, that's where it is. I'm going to try to find it. And this apparently is a picture of it. The specifications for the road set in June 1848 were as follows. Regular road width 30 feet, width on hills 20 feet, and width on cliffs 12 feet. This looks more like a cliff, but it's certainly not 20 feet wide, I don't think. The Howardsville Turnpike has been both a victim and a beneficiary of benign neglect. Trains abruptly ended its commercial life, but even today a hiker can find himself on it and follow it down the face of Humpback, admiring its gentle grade and the traces left of substantial brick and stone abutments that support the road over swales and creeks. The board also oversaw the plank road craze that was popular in the mid-1800s. Though not many were built in Virginia, the roads were a great improvement over the muddy roads. Plank roads were made with sawn lumber laid over 2 parallel rows of sticks or stringers, providing a hard, smooth surface, so it's kind of like a boardwalk. An account from New York describes a 2-horse team hauling 6 tons of iron 12 miles to Syracuse at the rate of 3/4 of a mile per hour. So it only took them 16 hours to go 12 miles. And the only limiting factor was the strength of the wagon and not that of the team or the roadways. There was a plank road leading northwest from Scottsville, and parts of the road retain the name as it does where it crosses 29 at North Garden. Today, according to Google Maps, Plank Road starts in Keene, just south of Scottsville, and goes into 250 just east of Afton. But it originally went from Stanton to Scottsville to the river as part of the Stanton and James River Turnpike. According to a brief history of the Stanton and James River Turnpike, written in 1975 by a student assistant, Douglas Young, according to him, William Kinney, Jr. of Stanton, president of the Turnpike, describes the road in 1830 annual report as a 43-mile road connecting Stanton and Scottsville with toll gates erected at Christians Creek, Rockfish Gap, Israel's Gap, Garland Store, and Scottsville. Kinney's report further described the road as being 22 feet wide with timber cleared and an additional 14 feet on each side. Now, plank roads are not to be confused with corduroy roads. This is a corduroy road, which were made by laying poles across swampy areas and covering them with dirt. So, not the most comfortable, I can imagine. And then, a few years ago, I was doing some research on the James River, and there's a plank road, right? I mean, a corduroy road right there in the river. If you can see those boards at the top. And they were all over the place in the river. I mean, that was very shallow, like 2 or 3 feet deep right there, so you could see it. But we've decided that it may be a new road, newish, put in the 1950s when they were building the Lynchburg Expressway and needed to get equipment over to Percival's Island, because I think this went from the Amherst side over to Percival's Island in a very shallow spot. And so that might have been just a road to get their equipment there. But it's the same principle anyway. It's a corduroy road. Road construction and maintenance suffered during and after the Civil War. Railroads were by then doing the heavy lifting, even taking all the business from the roads, from the canals, which had served the state well for about 40 years. And here you can see a detail of the Lynchburg image. Riverfront in 1855, where the railroads and the canals were coexisting for about 30 years. Most turnpikes and all local roads were returned to local control after the Civil War. So what was local control all about? It basically means if there's a road in front of your house, you got to fix it. So that's what local control was. From the beginning of organized road administration, the state used the corvée or statute labor system. This mandated that the citizens who lived on or near a road be compelled to work on it a certain unspecified number of days per year, or make a money payment in lieu of work. The 1785 road law defined laboring tithables as all male persons over the age of 16, with exceptions for the owner or master of 2 or more tithables, owners of ironworks, millers, ferry keepers, and the infirm. The list of exemptions eventually included owners of coal mines, persons over 60, town dwellers, officers of jails, turnpike and canal employees, officers of any literary institution, and ministers. And the fine for failure to appear was 75 cents per day. Well, here's a little story about a group of tithables reported by Nathaniel Paulette in the lowest office, John Tyler as overseer of roads. This is President John Tyler. Although he was nominally a Whig, he remained a Republican at heart. This did not endear him to his Whig neighbors when in 1845 he retired to his plantation about halfway between Richmond and Williamsburg. The Whig-dominated county court appointed Tyler overseer of roads with the responsibility of maintaining the road on which he lived. So to go from the highest office in the land to pretty much the lowest, they probably didn't have dog catchers back then, could have been seen as the ultimate humiliation. When the county clerk rode out to inform Tyler of his appointment, he probably hoped to see him refuse and pay a fine. Instead, Tyler accepted the office and set about to do the work, since, as he later explained, he was the logical choice since only he and an old lady lived on the road. This is his house, Sugar Forest. He began summoning all the male laboring tithables who lived nearby and determined to set an example of what could be done. He chose to cut down hills and fill the gullies to improve the road. Day after day, the work continued, since there were no time limits set for the work. And this was the harvest season, so the crops at the neighboring Whig-owned plantations were neglected as the men, mostly slaves, worked every day on the road. Tyler ignored the entreaties of the Whig justices of the court to stop, arguing that it was his duty to keep the road in good condition. When they finally asked him to resign his office, he refused, saying that offices were hard to obtain and he had no assurance of getting another, so he just stayed there. So what was travel like back then? A typical description in 1796 described it this way. Crowded in the stage by 10 passengers and their baggage, we did not arrive at Richmond before 11 o'clock at night, though we had set out from Williamsburg at 8 in the morning. Can you imagine? It was like 15 hours to get to... the rain, which has been abundant during the last 2 days, having rendered the roads very bad. So today it takes 53 minutes by car, and you can take a bike to there in 5 hours. So 15 hours. So these spotty road conditions continued beyond the Civil War. In fact, roads worsened during Reconstruction because railroads had begun to take travelers longer distances without the frequent need to stop to eat or sleep or rest the horses. Roads were in terrible shape after the war, and the state had few funds to restore them. The Turnpike era seemed to have ended. Within a few years, many of the road companies were out of business, and their turnpikes had reverted to the status of county roads. Maintenance was neglected. Sometimes the roads were avoided altogether as traffic took to the fields on either side, which they kind of do here. And then everything changed. The spark to reignite Virginia's highway system came in 1892 in a rented brick shed in Michigan, where Henry Ford was building his first gasoline engine. 14 years later, in 1906, the Virginia State Highway Commission began operation. The task of its first commissioner was to convince the public and state officials that roads were important. There were few automobiles around and were generally regarded as sporting toys for the weekend. Any sane traveler took the train rather than run the risk of frequent blowouts of flat tires or running out of gas that was then sold in hardware stores and paint stores. This is another picture that's probably Nelson County, taken by Victor Wood. Breakdowns and getting stuck in the mud were common, and other than a few hotels and taverns, travelers were forced to use the woods for toilet facilities or beg hospitality at farmhouses along the way. Pulling autos out of the mud became a sideline for some farmers. And roads were damaged by the autos themselves, since they traveled at a much faster pace. Country people began to lobby for banning autos from the roads altogether, or at least restricting their speed. But the rapid growth of auto ownership soon converted critics to owners, and a push to improve the roads began in earnest around 1910. So the growth of highways spurred the growth of the hospitality industry. In the early days of roads, meals and lodging were very sketchy in the countryside inns called ordinaries. One Tidewater ordinary was described as a little house absolutely isolated in the midst of the woods. For lodging, there's one large room for all the company. A pallet brought in and laid on the floor for each guest suffices for these country folk. An Englishwoman claimed, there are always several beds in every room, and strangers are obliged to sleep together. The sheets are mostly brown and seldom changed. And the hotels in the towns were somewhat better. Does anybody recognize this one? This one's in the town of Amherst, on Main Street. It was right across from Assumption Episcopal Church. This is back there now. I remember when this was still there. This was here until the 60s.
Wow.
And you may recognize this one, Mitchell's Brick House and Tavern, where we are right now. So as an example of one man's journey, here's an 18-hour trip that Parson Robert Rose documented in his diary for April 9, 1747. He'd been calling at his other plantations, and that red star is sort of where he had plantations. He'd been calling at his other plantations for days. He owned more than 2,000 acres in Orange and Essex counties, nearly 33,000 acres along the Ty and Piney rivers, and shared title to another 80,000 acres in early Albemarle. And by the way, he paid about 118 pounds for 23,700 acres on the Ty and Piney rivers. And I did the calculations, that's less than $2 an acre, about $1.80 an acre in today's money. He spent a couple of days with Mr. Harvey. Well, these are his other, you can see those are all rose plantations. And then that green dot is Aberfoyle or Aberfoyle where Mr. Harvey lived. And he says, set out about 5 in the morning, reached Ty River's mouth, then called Newmarket, now Norwood, by 11. bad road, and then Captain Cabell's by 1, and the courthouse, which would be Scottsville, about 5, and 1 Bibbs, the late Secretary Carter's overseer, about 11. So we started out at 5 in the morning and finally stopped at 11 o'clock. And then that is Secretary Carter's Road, Secretary's Road. There. This section of an 1866 Hotchkiss map, which I think is this one?
Yes.
Civil War map, shows part of the Tye River and Blue Ridge Turnpike that extended from Massey's Mill to Steele's Mill in Augusta County. It was practically made by William Massey. It's said that the road at one time was an old Indian trail. It begins at Massey's Mill, runs parallel with the Tye River to its head, and crosses over the mountain into Augusta County. At the time, this was the most direct route from that part of the valley of Virginia to Newmarket, now called Norwood on the James. The location of the toll gate in Nelson County is a mystery, at least to me. If any of you all know, okay, hang on.
It's plotted on that map right over there in the window. That's a survey of Massey's toll road.
Okay.
And the toll road actually starts in Tyro, and then the first toll was up at what's called Clarkson's Point, which would be probably in this area right here. And the other toll, and so he didn't toll the people in the lower part of the road because they were his neighbors. He started up there at Clarkson's Point with the toll, and the last toll was over at the upper end of the road.
So, according to a WPA study, there's a record in the clerk's office that shows the Tye River and the Ridge Turnpike purchased an acre of land in 1825 from Samuel Parrish. It was located near Clarkson's Point, but I didn't know where that was. There was a Clarkson place behind the Dairy Queen right there, but that's not the same one. There's a parish shown on this map right there, but that looks, I don't think that's where it was either.
No, that's a man-made parish.
According to the, according to the WPA study, the turnpike was on the south side of the river at this point, and it said that many travelers crossed to the north side of the river to avoid paying the toll. Here's the description of the toll house site. There's a point in the road just east of the above-mentioned house site that is and has been for more than 100 years known as Clarkson's Point. It's where the road goes around the point of a mountain which extends down very close to the river, and the road had to be run high up on the side of the mountain point, making a very dangerous place for travel. One other major obstacle inhibited long-distance travel, and that was navigation. Got something. So we're all spoiled today by being able to punch in a destination on our GPS and our car's navigation system. We remember trying to unfold and fold up a big map and read the fine print. But imagine what it was like before there were road maps or even route numbers. So the closest we get to a useful travel map in 1831 was this Finley's pocket map, which measures 3.5 by 2, which is the size of a business card. And unfolded to its full size, it was about 17 by 22. And this is not the Finley's pocket map. This is Mitchell's map of Virginia. I made a copy of it, but I'll pass it around if you want to see. But you can look on it. It's very much like this Finley's in that it's a pretty map, but it and here's the Finley's map. Doesn't show many roads. You know, you got a whole county and some creeks, and that's about it. So, pretty useless for finding your way anywhere. And as I mentioned earlier, when the Board of Public Works was created by the General Assembly in 1816, they were more interested in funding large projects such as the James River and Kanawha Canal and later railroads. But they needed to put state funds into improving and maintaining turnpikes as traffic increased after the Revolutionary War. So these little suede-bound books are at the Library of Virginia in Richmond. They're beautiful little books, and they're all just hand-drawn. They're the field notes of the surveyors. I think they're works of art. Here you see Lynchburg at the top of this one. And on this one, this spread shows the notes and map for a section of road that leads into Lynchburg from the direction of Russburg. And it crosses Fishing Creek and then follows Florida Avenue onto Grace Street and finally 12th Street.
Did you go to the library and take that photo? Yeah, so cool.
Those are my fingertips. And this is one of the highly detailed Civil War maps by General J.F. Gilmer showing parts of Nelson and Albemarle counties. I've highlighted the three main roads. Blue is the old stage road, and yellow is the Howardsville Turnpike, which is below the red one. And orange or red is the Stanton James River Turnpike. And you can zoom in and see the detail. You may not be able to read those words from here, but you know, it's got just about everybody's name on the map.
Did you run into any documentation of the amount of tolls for the turnpikes that was charged?
No, I have railroad fares, but I don't, and canal fares, but no, I don't know.
I'm wondering if they structured the tolls to say, oh, if you're carrying this much cargo, you're going to pay extra, or, you know, no
Does
sense
anybody
of that.
know that? Anybody know about tolls? I don't. So, the other problem was there weren't a lot of road signs either. These maps were invaluable, and the road signs that were there were pretty hard to read even then. You can see on that left one it says left to Beavers, and on the right it says 8 miles, and then right to Lynch's on the 60 miles on that road. And that is apparently still standing. This is a detail from the 1877 Gray's map of Lynchburg, just showing how detailed they did get. Every building is on there, and quite often they have names of who owned them. And this 1891 based map of Lynchburg is another one of my favorites, and not many people have seen this whole map in color. The only copy I know in color is at the Library of Congress. And this is a detail of that one, which shows, really does show just about every house and who lived there. You can see down at the lower right, just above 1891, Hotel Rivermont. Well, that is Rivermont Avenue in front of it, but that never became Hotel Rivermont. That became the Jones Memorial Library. So,
It really does look like it, doesn't it?
yeah, this whole map is more aspirational than real. It showed things that weren't quite there yet. And this is a 1914 edition of the Blue Book, published by the American Automobile Association to assist early automobile drivers. These were interesting. Here's part of the 1914 edition. So a route usually began at an important intersection or a courthouse. Here it begins at 7th and Main Streets. And AAA assigned its own numbers to routes, such as this Route 738 from Lynchburg to Charlottesville. Uniform routes or road number designations did not exist until the 1920s. A common direction was bear right or left with the poles, which indicated the telegraph lines that followed the route. Occasionally a reference was made to a directional sign, but more usually landmarks were used in these directions between Warrenton and Middleburg. End of the road, turn left around Store, and next right at Yellow Store. 8 miles later, curve right with poles indicating telegraph poles, and immediately take a left-hand road at the yellow house. So I guess you're okay as long as somebody didn't take their house.
I'm waiting for it to correct.
But
You
this,
think what?
the text refers us to the route map, pages 700 and 701, which is this, and that's absolutely worthless.
Right.
Yeah. At least we did have, we had poles and yellow stores to guide us, but, you know, that's just pretty worthless. It shows you that there's a road between some cities, and that's about it. This Library of Congress holds a 1912 AAA map of Virginia without the step-by-step directions. And that zooms in, and you can see how few drivable roads there were. And while the lines look pretty straight, they were merely indications of point to point, you know, which towns to go to. They weren't really how roads went. And notice here that to get to Livingston from the south, you had to go through Oak Ridge and Chipmunk. This map does include a useful couple of paragraphs instructing northerners, especially, how to navigate fords. In the south, fords were common. In fact, even if there was a bridge, instructions were often given to take the bridge as a last resort, only if the stream was especially high. So, and also at the Library of Congress is a guide called Mendenhall's Guide and Road Map, and this is another one that folded down to about a 5x7 book, but it was quite a large map. And it was similar to the auto associations, but with a huge map, and it was dated, this was dated 1914. The directions in this guidebook are not as specific as in the blue book. There aren't any yellow houses or telegraph poles mentioned here, but it clearly indicates the best routes to travel. Here's the route from DC to Lynchburg, and in this case we can follow along on the map. So, oh yeah, so there's, the directions simply direct you to a town with comments like rolling and hilly. We go from Charlottesville to Red Hill to North Garden to Coatesville to Shelton to Livingston to New Glasgow to Clifford to Amherst, MacGyver's, and Lynchburg. MacGyver's was a railroad station. It follows pretty much the current, or at least fairly recent path of Route 29, which I've shown in green, and it's pretty close. Moving forward 5 years, the oil and tire companies began getting into the map business. This is a B.F. Goodrich map from 1919, and it indicates which roads are paved. It too shows you going into Clifford, and then it's a toss-up whether to continue north to Rose Mills or east to New Glasgow, the route closer to present-day 29. And here's a 1923 standard oil map, still showing the detour into Clifford, but now continuing west through Piney River to get to Colleen on what is now Route 56. That's way down. From this, it appears that no recommended roads led east or west out of Amherst, or just not anything.
Yeah, my father told of in the 20s, when he carried tobacco to the big market in Lynchburg from Modesto. You went through Piney River, and at Clifford, you spent the night under the wagon to let the teams rest. And then the next day you made it into Lynchburg. It's 2 days to get to Lynchburg with a full load of tobacco.
From where?
Livingston.
Livingston.
Yeah.
And as far as you got the first day was Colleen?
Clifford.
Clifford.
And the same was true for my grandfather from
Yeah.
151 over here on the west side. He stopped in Clifford.
Yeah, well, I guess that is about halfway, isn't it? Yeah. Wow.
Did he have to ford the rivers?
Which road?
Were either, any of them, like,
Well, you got Main Ford Bridge, right? Main Ford. The old Roseland Road
Right.
and forded Tide River on into Pine River and Clifford. And now, I don't know what you had across the Buffalo River, to get across the Buffalo. Whether there was a bridge or a ford on the Buffalo to get into, Amherst.
I remember Tom Burford would tell me about, I guess it was his grandfather bringing apples in from Amherst County to Lynchburg to sell or to put them on the train or whatever. Well, he could have gone to Monroe, but anyway, bring them into Lynchburg. But at that point, the bridge into town was a toll bridge, and he didn't want to pay the toll, so he waited for the river to freeze over so he could bring his apples across the frozen river. And back then, apparently, it froze often enough in the winter that you could.
I assumed it for for the Buffalo one now, because I've never heard talk of a ford on Buffalo, not down low. There's some up higher, up off of 60, if you will. But around Amherst, I've never heard. You ever heard anybody talk of one about?
It's over with you.
I think there was a bridge there on the Buffalo Bed.
Yeah, I assumed there had to be a bridge. When was the first bridge over James coming from the north in Amherst? When was the first bridge?
Well, I know,
Before 1877.
yeah, I mean, it washed out in 1877. I don't remember the date.
Okay, but they had one that, because I assumed they also had,
Railroad bridges.
in the ferry, what do you call it, where they pull it across?
Road ferry?
Yeah, road ferry.
Uh-huh.
Lynch's Ferry.
Yeah.
Lynch's, right, yeah, okay, yeah, that's so, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there
He
was,
never talked to her that far, I just remember him laughing about taking 2 days to get there. With a load of tobacco.
it's funny, this map doesn't show it, but some of those old Civil War maps show very clearly 2 roads going north out of Lynchburg, as if they were the expressway and the old 29. And, you know, obviously the expressway wasn't there then, but I think it was talking about Roswell's Ferry was downriver, kind of where, I think it was near Horse Ford, and I think Roswell's Ferry was there. And I think either that or there was a ford up closer to where Point of Honor is now, upriver from Lynchburg, I mean, it's still in downtown. But there was a bridge, and I guess the bridge was there during the Civil War, 'cause, yeah, I'm sure it was. But Blackford wrote an account of going across the ford, because the army leaving Lynchburg, you know, had wagons and horses and cannon, I guess, and the bridge might not have held them, so they forded the river.
Well, a lot of the road bridges on the James River were actually built by the railroad. Because I know the one in Windsor,
Yeah,
when we tore those rock pilings down and stuff on that bridge back in 72 or so, building a new one, they were numbered. And, they had been brought in by the railroad. The rock was pre-cut because the railroad wanted business commerce from both sides of the river. So they would build bridges, you know, across the river into the other side so they could get the commerce from the other side.
well, the bridges along the river would have been built by the canal company for the canal to path too.
Were they just railroad tracks for, or were they automobile, vehicle,
Well, I think they
railroad?
were wooden bridges at first, but there's the pilings in Regina for that metal overhead bridge. So were put in there originally by the railroad.
Okay, but it was set for like passenger and not railroad, not the railroad.
No, they were set across the river to bring traffic to Regina from Buckingham.
They were both.
But they were built by the railroad.
I mean, it's probably one of these too. All right, let's see, 1926 highway map. So this is the first highway map issued by the state, and it included route numbers. What we know of is Route 29 is marked 18 here. I thought shoot. Well, anyway, I thought I'd mark these. So you can see between Lynchburg and Amherst, it's 18, and then when you get up closer to Shipman, it says 18. So that's basically Route 29. Oddly enough, the road seems to follow present-day Route 151 to pass through Piney River and Route 56 again, but then goes through Oak Ridge and Shipman to get to Lovingston, just as the 1912 AAA map recommended. But hey, Amherst had an east-west road finally, though certainly not paved and partly just dirt, but at least it got over the mountain to Buena Vista and Lexington. Well, seems to there. Because the next one, I think we lost the road. Maybe it's just behind the words Buena Vista, but that road over the mountain. So the next year, that strange cluster of roads to get to Colleen had gotten more bizarre, taking you north just about as far as Massey's Mill before turning south again through Roseland and then motoring into Colleen. But you can note here that most of the road is paved, which is what made going so far out of the way worthwhile and perhaps necessary. And the paved roads continued through Oak Ridge and Shipman again, certainly a long way around to get from Amherst to Lovingston. That appears to have fared much better than the road to Buena Vista, which seems to stop abruptly without going over the mountain. And I don't know, I think maybe they just hadn't finished building it yet. So here we are at 1929. On the Colleen front, we still have the convoluted path to get there, but look, now there's an option to go straight to Lovingston without going around Mr. Ryan's barn. Also of note is the continuous road from Amherst to Buena Vista. But let's look at the route numbers for a minute. That pesky road north of Lynchburg to Lovingston is numbered 18. Okay, but it stops in Lynchburg, and then what we would expect to be a continuation toward Danville is called 170 south of Lynchburg. The road coming in from Appomattox is Route 60, and it continues on the northwest to Natural Bridge. It seems like a pretty straight continuation, though that northern section is now it's 501, and the eastern section is 460. But, what we now call 60 through Amherst is called 13 on this map. But jumping to 1931, bear with me, we're almost there. Do note how few roads were paved in 1931 before I leave this slide. So the paved roads are the black ones and the white roads are not paved. So then, 1932, a big year for the Virginia State Highway Department. Almost all the roads are now paved, but even bigger news, and it doesn't have to do with Colleen this time, is the numbering system. The state finally adopted the national norm of odd numbers for north-south roads and even numbers for east-west roads, and for the most part, they settled on the numbers we still use today. Route 60 jumped from, Route 60 jumped from Lynchburg to Amherst. I don't have these things. And 29, 460, and 501 are all where they belong. 501 having previously been at times 14 and 60 was ultimately determined to be a north-south road and given an odd number.
That 151, I've got one of the short story. The 151 over Brinks Mountain coming from over there in 74 and 75. I was living in Beach Grove. I don't know if some of you know the character Thomas Campbell. He lived up there. Thomas was a pretty hard fellow to get along with all his neighbors, but he adopted my wife and I, and he loved us. And we were right next door. And he told me during the Depression that his father had a little dump truck. And one summer, he said like 12 years old, 13 years old, his job all summer was that he'd drive up Brinks Mountain, and the steam shovel was up there building the road, and would pick up one rock and put it on the back of his truck. And he would drive down to the area of Graves Store down in the valley there where it flattens out and dump it, and the group of convicts were there with sledgehammers, and they would break that rock up into rock size to build the road, and while he went back to get another rock, and he'd bring another rock in, but they usually put just one rock on that truck. So it's a little small A model, I think it says Chevy truck, but He said the whole summer, all he did was drive his dad's dump truck off of Brinks Mountain down to Graves Store out, and they were breaking the rocks up both Sledgehammer took. So that's about right, because that was 1932. So that was during the Depression now that road was built.
And when you say paved here, are we talking paved in the tarmac way or paved?
I think McAdam kind of tarmac, yeah. I don't think they would probably put as much tar in it as we do now. I mean, because it's, I don't know, not going to get Dick started.
I didn't say a word.
I don't know that area for sure. But I think it was more like the macadam kind of paving. All right, we're almost finished. I can't bear to leave Colleen though. Route 29 seems to go to Clifford and someplace called Shady Lane. And then makes an eastward turn to Colleen, apparently on 56 again. It makes you wonder why. Why were the rivers so coyoted? Was it because of the terrain, or was it because of commerce? Is that where the farmers and apple growers wanted to go? Or was it just the road with the fewest fords? The simple answer is that probably the best roads at the time were built privately, in this case by Mr. Ryan, the owner of Oak Ridge Estate, and by Mr. Massey of Massey's Mills. So that's one reason the roads were good there.
There's another observation there. It's 1932. You drive on the road from Colleen back over to 151. There is no Piney River there. It says Shady Lane. That Piney River didn't exist. The community of Piney River only was developed after the American Cyanamid plant came in, about the time of this map.
Okay.
So Shady Lane is really about where Piney River was, but
Okay.
Piney River wasn't a town.
Okay, good. All right, well, that's it. So- That's all I got, so.
Road stops here.
Yeah.